Hello everyone and welcome back to another short reviews video for September 2019. These are all the releases that have come out the previous month, the ones that I've listened to, and I didn't feel like making a full review out of them since I didn't have that many things to say, so they end up being in this segment just saying a few things about them. These are albums that go from 6 plus to 4 minus. Some of them I quite like them and I suggest you to go and listen to, others I don't. So with that being said, you know the drill, let's get into these albums. And at first we have this new release of Black Cilice, which is an album that I was actually anticipating from the newer black metal releases, since the previous album was quite solid. A really nice, atmospheric, but extremely raw black metal album with extremely nasty production and some really sick riffs. While this album keeps the nastiness and the atmosphere, the vocals are as grim as ever, the ideas on this one feel quite lackluster. The riffs on this one in particular were forgettable. This album ended up being extremely boring even though we're talking about a short album, but the lengthy tracks didn't lead up to a fulfilling experience. Instead, this album didn't manage to give to me this satisfying lasting impression. Unfortunately, this was one of my disappointments from this year, and so I just have to give this album a 5 minus out of 10. I think Iggy Pop's new album is not that bad. Instead, I like this new direction that he's taking with his sound, because this is truly not that much of a rock album. It goes to lots of different directions, like dark wave, there are some nice electronic elements to it, and it's mostly jazzy, and we see Iggy Pop going to this spoken word direction like he did with the EP that he released with Underworld, and some of the first tracks over here are actually quite solid. I like the melodies, I like their simplicity, and just Iggy Pop just bringing the songs with his spoken word passage. Unfortunately, as the album progresses towards the second half, it has some quite short tracks that feel like filler and don't manage to bring something more to the album and making it a more fulfilling experience. And since we're talking about a quite short album that is a little bit more than 30 minutes long, the final result could have been something better, but for what it is right now, it has a solid first half and a weaker second one. Fans might not get that impressed to it since we're not talking about a rock album, it goes to lots of other different paths, but still go and give it a listen because there are some quite nice ideas here and there. I'm going to give Free a 6 plus out of 10. I was never the hugest fan of Post Malone, so I wasn't expecting something all that much from this album, but honestly, his discography is a bit hit or miss. I think that actually his debut Stoney was a bit of a decent album. It was not that bad. There were some nice tracks here and there, but then he released Beer Box and Bentleys, which in my opinion felt like I was listening to the same track in multiple versions. And now with Hollywood splitting, at least this album is a bit more varied. We also see Post Malone getting more into a pop rock direction. Some of the ideas and some of the instrumentals are quite decent, and still I think Post Malone has a really good voice. But one thing that really drags this album down for being better is the features. In my opinion, most of them actually ruin the songs because they might not fit at all with the whole aesthetic that Post Malone has created over these tracks, and lots of the features over here are quite bad. Even the one with Ozzy Osbourne and Travis Scott, which I would never anticipate to be a thing at all, I don't think the features work all that well in these occasions. Still though, I find this better than Beer Box and Bentleys since it's a bit more varied, there is a bit more to this, but it's still a quite average album. It's just a 5 out of 10 for me. Another album from a band I was never that much of a big fan of. Some of their first releases were definitely some of the better examples of nu metal, but the recent outputs do absolutely nothing for me. And even though they say like this is a great comeback album, like this is one of the best things they've done for lots of years, I don't really see it. I mean, there are definitely some more okay moments compared to some of their more recent outputs, but that doesn't say all that much. This is still another average album that goes into nu metal and groove metal, and yeah, it's just an average album. It's just a 5 out of 10 for me. Cloudrat is a grindcore screamo outfit that I found out recently thanks to Artifact Records, because this is a label that I follow, and it's pretty interesting to see this album being released from a label that is mostly known to release experimental electronic music, so it's quite nice and refreshing to see the label releasing a grindcore album and also have all of their previous stuff, all of their discography available on their own Bandcamp page. I think some of their stuff are quite decent. There are some great performances on this thing. Some of the tracks really sound nasty and quite aggressive. Possibly this album has the best production out of everything they've done so far, but the one thing that I'm not really that much of a big fan of are the vocals. They would feel much better in the previous releases, but on this one they're not that impressive or that distinct. Maybe it's just me, but I didn't really get that much from the vocal delivery on this one in particular. But still, this is a decent grindcore album that has elements of screamo and crushed punk, and pretty much that's about it. So I'm going to give this a 6 plus out of 10. There are some solid moments on this one. It's a recommendation for me in the genre. And with that being said, let's get into the EP that the band released the exact same day as a demo project coming together with Pollinator, which is an EP that goes into a more different direction. This one actually goes into electronic stuff. It's an ethereal wave and ambient pop release from a grindcore band, so this one definitely got my interest. Unfortunately though, this album lacks of interesting production. This EP sounds way too lo-fi, and at times it's a bit empty without that much of an atmosphere, and I was definitely hoping for more out of it, but in the end this was just a big mess. So a bit of a disappointment of an EP, definitely expecting something more out of it. So yeah, just an average EP, a 5 out of 10. By far my least favorite Chelsea Wolfe album. I dig some of her previous stuff going into this gothic rock and gothic folk direction, but honestly I quite liked her recent doom metal sound more. The production is nice, the vocals are beautiful once again, but the ideas, the songwriting on this is really forgettable, really lackluster, an extremely boring album, and a definite disappointment, something that I was not expecting that I was about to say for a Chelsea Wolfe project, but this is the one that didn't manage to click with me at all. This is just a 5 plus out of 10 for me. Pixies, they've had some legendary albums back in the day. Now this new one feels completely unnecessary. Weak instrumentation and a really bland sound that we've heard so many times before. I don't like to use this term, but this album definitely sounds extremely outdated. I wasn't a fan of this. This is just a 4 out of 10 for me. Amir Van, former member of Brockhampton, was kicked out of a group after some allegations against him, and after a long period of time he is finally back having a new EP, but instead of giving an apologetic aura, I was expecting something more from it, but instead he showed a bad and nasty attitude, and all of this blended with some of the most bland and most generic trap instrumentals I've heard in this year. Just a 4 out of 10. Definitely disappointing. And last but not least, the debut from See You Space Cowboy. Now this band has done some quite decent EPs over the past years or so. They also had a decent compilation this year, but my main issue with this album in particular is that it sounds a lot like Converge counting out the mind-blowing production of Kurt Ballou and actually adding some elements of melodic metalcore and some quite generic breakdowns. I must admit though, I quite like the mathcore guitar tones on this one, they're pretty sick. But this album pretty much offers nothing new, and for a short project it's just a bit all over the place. It tries to sort of feel as a continuous theme, but it goes into lots of different moods, other tracks being slower, other being heavily aggressive, and I mean it's good, it's nice, but it could have been better in my opinion. I'm just going to give it a 6 out of 10. And that's all I had to say for these albums from September 2019. What's your opinion on these albums? If you have heard them, like them, dislike them, why? Let me know down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.